Have you ever wondered how a single act of kindness could rewrite your entire life? Picture this: a quiet, unassuming woman, her days steeped in routine, her heart heavy with unspoken grief, until one rainy afternoon changes everything. Meet Clara Bennett, a 67-year-old widow in the small town of Pinewood, who's lived in the shadows since her husband, Army Sergeant James Bennett, passed away. Once the heart of every town gathering, Clara now fades into the background, her vibrant spirit dimmed by loss. But what if one selfless moment could bring her past rushing back and transform her future forever? Stay tuned as Clara's story unfolds, revealing the power of quiet gratitude, right here on Daily Narrated Stories, where we bring you heartwarming tales of real kindness every week. Clara's mornings begin at 5 a.m., the shrill alarm piercing the stillness of her modest home on Elm Street. By 5:30, she's easing her weathered 1995 Honda Civic out of the driveway, heading to Miller's Dry Cleaning, where she's worked for 26 years. "Morning, Mrs. Bennett," calls Tom, the night guard, as he wraps up his shift. Clara offers a faint nod, her smile never quite touching her eyes, a quiet sadness lingering in her expression. The shop, just blocks from Fort Hamilton, thrives on military uniforms, and for Clara, pressing them is more than a job, it's a sacred ritual. Each crease must be flawless, each button gleaming, each insignia perfectly aligned. Her co-workers often wonder why she insists on handling these orders herself. "Let me do these," she murmurs, gently taking the uniforms from younger hands. These aren't just clothes, they mean something. What her colleagues don't know is Clara's secret. After pressing each uniform, she slips a handwritten note into the pocket. "Thank you for your service. You matter." Her elegant script carries a message of gratitude, a ritual she's performed thousands of times over the years, a silent tribute to the soldiers who remind her of James. At home, Clara's life is a quiet loop. A solitary dinner at her kitchen table, the clink of her fork against the plate echoing in the empty room. A cup of chamomile tea while the evening news hums in the background, and a nightly ritual that keeps James close. She opens the glass case in her living room, gently dusting James's folded flag and medals, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, honors from a life of service cut short. "Good night, James," she whispers, pressing her fingers to her lips, then to the glass, her touch lingering as if she could feel him through the cold surface. Now, imagine you're Clara, standing at a crowded bus stop on a rainy day, your knees aching from arthritis. You've just secured the last seat on the bus when a weary soldier boards, his uniform soaked, his face etched with exhaustion. Do you keep your seat, knowing your knees desperately need the rest after a long day? Or do you offer your seat, despite the pain, because you feel a deep duty to honor his service? Share your choice in the comments below, and if you're moved by stories of quiet heroism, hit that like button and subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories for more tales that touch the heart. Every Sunday, Clara Bennett sits in the back pew of Pinewood's First Methodist Church, slipping in as the service begins and leaving during the final hymn to avoid lingering conversations. To most congregants, she's merely the widow from the dry cleaners, her voice a rare whisper in the sanctuary, her story a quiet enigma. She's been that way since James passed. The older members murmured during coffee hour, their voices tinged with sympathy. High school sweethearts, you know. Never had kids. He was her everything. They don't see the private rituals that anchor her days. How she still sets two places at her table on holidays, the delicate clink of porcelain echoing in her empty kitchen. Or how she buys the sharp Dijon mustard James loved, its bitter tang a painful reminder of shared meals, though she can barely stand its taste. On her nightstand, his cologne bottle sits, the cap slightly ajar, releasing faint traces of cedarwood into the air, a scent that wraps around her like a ghostly embrace, keeping James's presence alive in the stillness of her bedroom. In Pinewood, where American flags flutter proudly on every porch and yellow ribbons loop around the ancient oaks lining Main Street, Clara moves through life like a shadow, her steps soft and deliberate. She spends Memorial Day at the town cemetery, kneeling beside veterans' gravestones with a small brush and a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing away moss and dirt until the names gleam again. She donates anonymously to the Veterans Support Network, slipping crumpled bills into envelopes she mails from the post office, her handwriting careful to disguise her identity. Whenever the national anthem plays, at the 4th of July parade, or even on the radio in the dry cleaning shop, she stands at rigid attention, her hand over her heart, her posture a silent tribute. To those who notice her, she's just another patriot in a town that wears its pride openly. But they don't see the depth of her devotion, the way each pressed uniform, each quiet donation, each moment of reverence is a thread tying her to James, a way to keep his memory alive in a world that has moved on without him. Clara Bennett, dutiful, invisible, kind, unaware that her life of silent service is on the brink of a dramatic shift, sparked by one small act on a stormy Friday afternoon in November. The sky had been a heavy gray all day, the air thick with the promise of rain. At 5:30 p.m., as Clara clocked out from Miller's dry cleaning, the clouds finally broke, unleashing a torrent that soaked her thin coat in seconds. She pulled the fabric tighter around her, her arthritic knees protesting with each hurried step toward the bus stop. The cold bit into her joints, a sharp reminder of Dr. Harper's recent warning. "Clara, you're pushing yourself too hard. That arthritis isn't getting better." She brushed off the thought, her mind focused on getting home to her heating pad and a cup of tea. "Gonna be a wet one, Mrs. Bennett," called Sam, the driver of the number 12 bus, his voice warm as she climbed aboard, shaking raindrops from her silver hair. "Looks like it," she replied, her tone soft but weary, the weight of the day settling into her bones. The bus was unusually crowded, the storm having driven people from their usual walking routes. Clara's heart sank as she scanned the aisle, spotting only one seat left near the back. Her knees throbbed with a dull, persistent ache as she shuffled forward, gripping the seat backs for support, her breath shallow with the effort. "Thank goodness," she whispered to herself as she sank into the seat, a wave of relief washing over her. The cushion was worn, the fabric scratchy against her coat, but it felt like a small mercy after a 10-hour shift on her feet. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the tension in her shoulders ease, the hum of the bus engine a soothing backdrop. Dr. Harper's words echoed again. "You can't keep pushing yourself like you're still in your 40s, but Clara had no choice. The dry cleaning shop was her lifeline, a connection to the military community that had been James's world, and now hers. The bus jolted forward, its wipers struggling against the downpour, the rhythmic swish-swish a hypnotic counterpoint to the patter of rain on the windows. Clara gazed out, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. A simple game she'd played since childhood, one that always brought a flicker of comfort on hard days. The streets of Pinewood blurred into streaks of gray and green, the familiar shapes of the town distorted by the storm. The gentle rocking of the bus and the steady sound of the wipers began to lull her into a doze, her eyelids growing heavy. But at the town square stop, the doors hissed open, snapping her back to attention. A tall man in a drenched army uniform stepped aboard, his movements slow and labored. He leaned heavily on a metal crutch, his right pant leg pinned up at the knee, water dripping from his uniform cap onto a face etched with exhaustion. Clara watched as he scanned the packed bus, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed a deep, unspoken pain. No one moved. Teenagers stayed glued to their phones, their earbuds a barrier to the world around them. A businessman in a crisp suit pretended to be engrossed in his newspaper, though his eyes never moved across the page. A young mother busied herself with her toddler, adjusting the child's raincoat with exaggerated focus. The air in the bus grew thick with an unspoken tension, a collective avoidance that Clara felt like a weight on her chest. For a moment, she hesitated, her own pain screaming for attention. Her knees burned, the ache radiating up her thighs, and the thought of standing for the rest of the ride made her stomach twist with dread. The heating pad waiting at home called to her, a promise of relief after a grueling day pressing uniforms for an upcoming military ceremony at Fort Hamilton. Clara's mind churned with conflicting emotions, a storm as fierce as the one outside. She could almost feel James's presence beside her, his steady hand on her shoulder, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "You've always been stronger than you think, Clara." A memory flashed, James returning from his last deployment, his uniform hanging loosely on his frame, his eyes hollow with the weight of what he'd seen. She'd met him at the airport, her heart swelling with pride. but she'd noticed how people averted their gazes, unwilling to acknowledge the sacrifice his uniform represented. The memory stung, a sharp pang of regret for all the times she'd wished the world would see what she saw in him. Now, on this bus, she saw that same dismissal in the passengers' indifference, and it lit a fire in her chest, a fierce determination to honor this soldier, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. But then the soldier swayed slightly as the bus turned a corner, his crutch slipping on the wet floor, and in that moment, Clara's resolve hardened. She saw James in him. The same quiet dignity, the same unspoken burden. Her heart clenched, a mix of duty and longing surging through her, drowning out the protests of her body. She pushed herself to her feet, her knees screaming in protest, her voice stronger than she felt. "Sir, please, take my seat." The soldier turned, his tired eyes meeting hers with a flicker of surprise, as if he hadn't expected anyone to notice him. "Ma'am, that's not necessary. I can stand," he said, his voice rough but polite. "I insist," Clara replied, her tone firm, though her hands trembled slightly. "My stop's coming up." It was a lie. Her stop was still 30 minutes away, but it was the kind of lie James would have understood, a small deception born of kindness. A teenager nearby, his earbuds dangling, muttered to his friend, "Why make a fuss?" She didn't have to do that. His words stung, but Clara barely heard them. Sam, the driver, caught her eye in the rearview mirror, shaking his head with a knowing smile that said, "Mrs. Bennett, always too kind." But Clara didn't care. In her heart, those in uniform deserved respect above all else. She remembered James's words, spoken over a quiet dinner years ago, his voice steady with conviction. When someone wears that uniform, Clara, they're signing a blank check to their country, up to their life. That's the highest calling. Those words had stayed with her, a guiding light through the darkness of his loss, and now they propelled her to stand, gripping the handrail as the bus splashed through puddles, her knees burning with each jolt. The bus ride felt endless, each bump and turn amplifying the tension in Clara's body. She stole glances at the soldier, who sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly around his crutch. His uniform was faded, the fabric worn at the edges, and Clara wondered about the stories it held, the battles he'd fought, the losses he'd endured. A faint scar ran along his jaw, barely visible in the dim light, and she couldn't help but imagine the moment that had marked him. Was it a battlefield injury, or something more personal, a reminder of a life forever changed? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, adding a layer of mystery to the man now occupying her seat. Around her, the other passengers seemed oblivious, their indifference a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing within her. She felt a strange sense of isolation, as if she and the soldier were the only two people on the bus who understood the weight of that uniform. When the soldier finally looked up and met her gaze, Clara summoned a courage she rarely tapped in her quiet life. Her voice, though soft, carried a warmth that surprised even her. "My husband was an army sergeant, James Bennett," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue after years of silence. "Thank you for your service. We know what you sacrifice." The soldier's eyes widened, and he studied her face with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Are you Clara from Miller's Dry Cleaning? The one who leaves notes in uniform pockets saying you matter?" Clara's cheeks flushed, her secret ritual exposed after decades of anonymity. She nodded, sheepish, her fingers tightening around the handrail. "You don't remember me," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "but I remember you. I'm Captain Daniel Harper. 15 years ago, your husband, Sergeant James Bennett, saved my life in Kabul. I've been searching for you ever since." The bus fell silent, the hum of the engine the only sound, as even the chatty teenagers paused to listen. Clara's grip on the handrail tightened, her knees forgotten as the past flooded back, a tidal wave of memories she'd kept locked away. Her heart raced, a storm of emotions swirling within her. She could almost hear James's laughter, feel the warmth of his hand on hers, as if he were standing beside her on that bus. A memory surged, James's last letter, tucked in her purse, his words echoing. "It's the small things, Clara, that make the biggest difference." Her throat tightened with a mix of pride and sorrow, the scent of rain mingling with the phantom trace of James's cologne. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but fear held her back. What if this connection to James brought more pain than healing? A humble woman, living a quiet life, yet carrying a heart so vast. And now, by chance, she meets her husband's comrade. Captain Harper's voice broke through her thoughts, his weathered face etched with gratitude. "James saved me," he said, his words heavy with memory. "We were clearing a building after an ambush when it caught fire. I was pinned under rubble, flames closing in. Everyone was ordered to evacuate." Clara's breath hitched. She'd never heard this story, though she'd always known James kept the worst of his experiences from her, shielding her from the horrors he'd faced. "But James refused to leave me," Harper continued, his voice cracking. "He ran back into that inferno, pulled me out, suffered second-degree burns and smoke inhalation. He never told you." Clara shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes, her vision blurring as the rain outside mirrored the storm within. James never spoke much about his service. He'd just say, "That's what soldiers do. They don't leave their own behind." A sad smile crossed Harper's face, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "That sounds like him, always downplaying his heroism. But those injuries, Clara, they're why he was discharged early. The lung damage, it's what eventually," he trailed off, unable to finish, the unspoken words hanging heavy between them. Clara's voice faltered, her throat tight with grief. "I know," Harper nodded, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've carried that guilt every day since I learned the truth, that his sacrifice for me cost him his life years later." The air in the bus seemed to thicken, the weight of Harper's revelation pressing down on Clara. She glanced around, noticing the other passengers now watching them, their curiosity palpable. A woman in a red coat whispered to her companion, her eyes wide with intrigue, while a man in a baseball cap leaned forward, straining to hear more. Who else on this bus might know more than they let on? Clara wondered, her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and unease. The rain pounded harder on the roof, a relentless drumbeat that amplified the tension, as if the storm itself were holding its breath for what would come next. The bus slowed at Elm Street, the familiar sight of her neighborhood coming into view through the rain-streaked windows. "Mrs. Bennett, this is you," Sam called from the front, his voice cutting through the charged silence. But Clara stayed rooted, her hand still gripping the rail, unwilling to sever this fragile thread to James. "I'll catch the next one, Sam," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within, a decision that broke her decades-long routine. The rain continued to pour outside, turning Pinewood streets into blurred watercolors, the familiar shapes of her world distorted by the storm. In that moment, Clara felt a strange alignment, as if the universe had orchestrated this meeting on this rainy evening, a cosmic convergence she couldn't ignore. Harper spoke again, his tone gentle but urgent. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm meeting some of James's old unit tonight. We gather every Veterans Day weekend. About 20 of us are in town, men whose lives James touched. We've been trying to find you for years." Clara hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't attended a social event since James's funeral. The thought of being surrounded by strangers, of being the center of attention, making her stomach churn with anxiety. Her routine called to her, the heating pad for her knees, the quiet house, the predictable solitude that had become her sanctuary. "I don't know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not one for gatherings these days." An older man nearby, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up, his voice gravelly but kind. "Ma'am, if I may, sometimes opportunities come that were meant to seize. I missed my chance to thank the soldier who saved my daughter in Iraq. I kept thinking there'd be time. There wasn't. Don't make my mistake." Clara looked at him, startled by his words, her eyes searching his face for a clue to his story. The man's glasses glinted in the dim bus light, his expression unreadable, a faint scar on his hand catching Clara's eye as he adjusted his coat. He nodded subtly, as if he knew more than he let on, leaving Clara wondering about his true identity. Who was this stranger, and why did he seem so invested in her decision? The bus reached the end of the line, passengers disembarking with curious glances at the trio, still deep in conversation. Harper's voice softened, his eyes pleading. "I understand if this is too much, Mrs. Bennett. But James was our guardian angel. He watched over us all. We just want to tell his wife what he meant to us." Clara met Harper's gaze, seeing a flicker of James in his steadfast eyes. The same quiet determination, the same unyielding loyalty. In that moment, she made a choice that would change everything. "All right," she said, straightening despite her exhaustion, her voice carrying a newfound resolve. "I'll come." They took a rideshare to a neighborhood Clara didn't recognize, the streets unfamiliar in the fading light of the storm. As they pulled up to a modest house with cars lining the street, her courage wavered, a flutter of nerves in her chest. "They'll be so happy to meet you," Harper said, helping her from the car, his hand steady on her arm. Inside, Clara stepped into a room of over 20 men in civilian clothes, many bearing visible scars of war, some physical, others etched into their expressions. The chatter died as she entered, and one by one, they stood at attention, a spontaneous salute that brought fresh tears to her eyes, the weight of their respect overwhelming her. An older man stepped forward, his voice gruff but warm. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm Sergeant Major Henry Lawson. Your husband saved my life, took a bullet for me in Mosul." Another approached, his hands trembling slightly. "He shared his last ration with me during a 4-day patrol in 115-degree heat. Ended up in the med tent himself from dehydration." One by one, they shared stories of James's quiet leadership, his humor in the darkest moments, his small sacrifices that meant everything in war zones. A younger veteran spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. "Ma'am, we know about your notes too. Those you matter notes you slip into uniforms. I kept mine through 3 tours. It's still in my wallet." He pulled out a faded slip of paper, Clara's handwriting barely legible, the edges worn from years of being carried. A veteran named Tom, his voice rough with emotion, stepped forward, his eyes glistening. "I was on the brink of giving up after my 2nd tour," he said, his hands shaking as he spoke. "Found your note in my pocket the day I planned to end it all. You matter," it said. "I'm here today because of you, Mrs. Bennett." His words hit Clara like a wave, the weight of her unseen impact crashing over her. She hadn't known, had never imagined, that her small gestures could mean so much. Another man, his arm in a sling, added, "I read your note before a mission in Helmand. It gave me the courage to keep going, even when I thought I couldn't. You saved me too, in your own way." Clara's breath caught, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and humility, the room blurring through her tears. Clara's hands trembled as she reached into her purse, pulling out a worn letter, James's last to her, written days before he died. "I may not have done anything great," she read aloud, her voice breaking with each word, "but I believe it's the small things, like your love for me each day, that truly make a difference in this life." The room fell silent, 2 decades of grief and love hanging in the air, shared among those who understood the cost of sacrifice. Clara's voice quivered as she read, each word a dagger of memory, slicing through the walls she'd built around her heart. She could almost feel James in the room, his presence a warm glow amidst the pain, his laughter echoing in her mind. The veteran's stories had painted a picture of the man she'd loved, the man she'd lost, and for the first time in years, she felt a connection to him that wasn't steeped in sorrow, but in shared pride. As the evening ended, Harper offered to drive Clara home. The rain had stopped, the streets shimmering under streetlights, reflecting the glow of a town transformed by the storm. "There's something else you should know," Harper said as they drove, his tone carrying a hint of anticipation. "Our unit recommended James for the Silver Star and Purple Heart for saving me and 2 others that day. But due to lost paperwork, it was delayed." Clara frowned, confusion knitting her brow. "But he received those medals. They're in my case." Harper shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Those were earlier commendations. This was for the fire incident. Yesterday, after 15 years, the final approval came through. The Secretary of Defense wants to present them to James's next of kin." Clara sat in stunned silence, her mind racing as she processed the news. After all these years, James's final act would be honored, a recognition she'd never expected. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harper's smile widened, a glint of mystery in his eyes. "That's the remarkable part. Your kindness on the bus wasn't seen by just anyone. That man who spoke up, he's Senator William Grant, a former Green Beret. He saw everything and called me right after." Clara's eyes widened, her heart skipping a beat. The man with glasses? I thought he was a teacher. Harper chuckled, the sound warm in the quiet car. He prefers anonymity when traveling. He's the one who pushed James's medal through after years of it being stalled. Harper's tone shifted, a hint of intrigue in his voice that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. Senator Grant has a way of making things happen, Mrs. Bennett. And he wasn't the only one watching. Clara's heart raced. What did he mean? Who else had been on that bus, observing her quiet act of kindness? The question lingered, unanswered, a tantalizing thread of mystery that left her on edge, eager for the next revelation. Harper pulled up to her modest home, his expression earnest. Would it be okay if we came by tomorrow morning to honor James? Nothing big, just a small ceremony with his unit. Clara nodded, her voice soft but certain. Of course, 10 o'clock would be perfect. Harper smiled, a glint in his eye that Clara couldn't decipher, leaving her anticipating what was to come, the promise of something extraordinary hanging in the air. The next morning, Clara woke early, despite the late night, her body still humming with the emotions of the evening. She made her coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunrise paint the autumn leaves gold, a rare sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in years, she felt a lightness. Sharing James's stories with those who knew him as their sergeant had been healing, a balm to the wounds she'd carried for so long. At 9:30, she dressed in her best navy dress, reserved for Easter and Christmas, the fabric soft against her skin, and dabbed on a touch of lipstick, a small act of care she hadn't bothered with in years. At 10 o'clock, she opened her front door and froze. Her entire yard was covered in American flags, hundreds of them in perfect rows, their colors vivid against the morning light, and standing in formation on her driveway were at least 50 uniformed soldiers at rigid attention. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her heart pounding with a mix of awe and disbelief. Harper stepped forward in dress uniform, his posture formal but his eyes warm. Mrs. Bennett, on behalf of those who served with Sergeant James Bennett, we wanted to do this right. A black limousine pulled up and Senator Grant emerged, followed by the Secretary of Defense and, to Clara's shock, the Vice President of the United States. The neighborhood had gathered, hands over hearts, news vans lining the street, their cameras flashing in the morning sun. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary began, his voice carrying over the crowd. We are here to honor not one American hero, but two. Cameras flashed as the Vice President presented Clara with James's Silver Star and Purple Heart. Your husband's bravery saved 3 soldiers at the cost of his health, the Vice President said, his tone reverent. And from what I've learned, Mrs. Bennett, you've carried on his legacy in your own quiet way. Neighbors who'd barely noticed Clara for years chanted her name. Clara, Clara, Clara. Their voices a chorus of newfound respect. The mayor of Pinewood, who'd only ever nodded to her in church, stepped forward, tears in his eyes. From this day forward, November 12th will be James and Clara Bennett Day in Pinewood, honoring our military heroes and the families who support them. Clara stood in stunned silence, clutching the medals to her chest, the cool medal a tangible link to James's sacrifice. Harper raised his hand, and 50 soldiers saluted her in unison, their movements precise and reverent, a tribute that brought fresh tears to her eyes. The president sends his regrets he couldn't be here, the vice president added. But he asked me to give you this letter of thanks for your decades of support to our military. As reporters surged forward, Clara found her voice, her words clear despite the emotion trembling within her. The honor belongs to James, she said, her voice ringing with quiet strength, and to all who serve. I'm just a dry cleaner who believes in saying thank you. Her humility only endeared her more, and within hours, Clara Bennett, the invisible widow who pressed uniforms and left notes of gratitude, became a national symbol of quiet heroism. 5 years later, Clara, now 72, still works at Miller's Dry Cleaning, renamed Bennett Service Cleaners. Despite calls to retire, she continues her routine, but she's no longer invisible. I don't need to rest, she tells those who ask, her voice firm with purpose. Every uniform I press has a story, a person behind it. This isn't just a job, it's how I connect with people like James. The shop is now a gathering place for veterans, who come not just for uniforms, but for coffee and conversation with the woman whose story inspired a movement. Clara teaches her young staff, It's not medals that define us. It's the small daily actions. How carefully you fold a shirt, how sincerely you say thank you. That's what matters. The shop walls are lined with photos. James in his army uniform, his smile bright and unwavering. Clara at the White House receiving the Civilian Medal of Honor, her expression a mix of awe and humility. And dozens of soldiers who visited over the years, their faces a testament to the lives she's touched. Using the stipend from James's medals, Clara founded the James Bennett Silent Hero Scholarship for children of veterans and essential workers. She visits schools and bases, sharing James's story and the power of small actions, her voice steady as she speaks to wide-eyed children and stoic soldiers alike. My husband never knew the full impact of his sacrifice, she often says, her eyes glistening with memory. And I never knew the impact of my notes. That's the magic of kindness. You rarely see where it leads. Her story has rippled far beyond Pinewood. Clara's nephew, Ethan, joined the army, inspired by her legacy. You have no idea, Aunt Clara, he wrote from overseas, but my unit knows about Mrs. Bennett and her notes. They say as long as America has people like you, we'll always have a reason to serve. Schools now teach Clara's story in their citizenship programs, showing children that heroism isn't just on battlefields, but in the quiet kindness of ordinary lives. On her 70th birthday, over 1,000 veterans marched past her house in a parade, their footsteps a thunderous tribute to her impact. A statue of Clara and James now stands in Pinewood's town square, inscribed, "The Silent Heroes." Colonel Harper, now a general, named his daughter Clara, saying, "She reminds me daily of the power of kindness." In a rare interview, Clara was asked, "Do you think James is proud of you?" Tears streamed down her face as she smiled, her voice soft but certain. "No, I think he's laughing, saying, 'See, Clara, I told you. The small things matter most.' And now I know he was right. A seat on a bus, a simple note, a warm embrace. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life." Clara's journey reminds us that no act of kindness is too small to make a difference, a lesson that resonates with the values of courage, resilience, and gratitude that connect us all. Reflect on Clara's story. What small act of kindness can you do today? Maybe write a thank you note to a veteran or offer a seat to someone in need. Share your ideas in the comments with Daily Narrated Stories, and let's inspire each other to make a difference, just like Clara did. 5 years ago, Clara Bennett gave up her seat on a crowded bus. The next morning, she opened her door to a sight she'll never forget. Her porch covered in American flags, soldiers saluting her in honor of James. Her story, shared by Daily Narrated Stories, shows that true heroes work in the quiet spaces of everyday life, changing the world one small gesture at a time. If Clara's story moved you, don't wait. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories now for more tales of real kindness that uplift and inspire. Time is fleeting, and these stories remind us to act with compassion today. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And together, let's keep the legacy of silent heroes alive. Join us at Daily Narrated Stories, where every tale is a chance to change the world, one small act at a time.